I'm going to show you how to make this bakery soft bread with 7 ingredients and no fancy equipment. You ready? Come on, let's do it. For this recipe, you'll need 4½ cups of bread flour, a ½ cup of warm milk with 1 cup of warm water added to make a total of 1½ cups, 2¼ teaspoons of sugar, 2½ teaspoons of yeast or 1 packet if you're using packets, 2 tablespoons of softened butter or shortening, but today I'm using shortening, and 2 tablespoons of sea salt. That's it. Later in the video, you'll see me use oil to coat my bowl. This is the oil that I use. When I make bread, I make sure that I'm using an all-purpose bread flour. Now, it really doesn't matter the brand, but usually I use Gold Medal, and I'm pretty brand loyal. This flour was actually ground by my local grocery store, Nino Savaggio's. It is fantastic, and if you happen to live anywhere near any of these places, I would definitely go and check them out. But you want to make sure you're using bread flour because it's unbleached, and unbleached flour helps gluten form, and that's what gives your bread your rise. So you definitely want to use a bread flour. Any brand will work, but bread flour for sure. So we're going to start out by adding in our warm milk and the yeast that we measured out. And at this point, I also like to take a little bit of sugar. This is a 1/4 teaspoon to wake the yeast up a little bit. I give that a little whisk to make sure it's all mixed. And then I let it sit for a second. About 5 minutes should be enough. You really want the yeast to be able to get foamy. That's the goal. If the yeast does not foam up in that 5 minutes, you might want to start over. Now that our yeast has had a chance to foam up a little bit, I'm going to add my shortening into it and kind of incorporate it. I'm going to use the whisk for this to kind of break it up into smaller pieces. In a second, you'll see that it's not fully going to dissolve or break down just yet, but that's okay. As you work it, it'll dissolve and break down into the flour. Now that I have it broken down the way that I like it, I'll start incorporating the flour and salt, which I sifted together prior to shooting the video. Sorry I didn't let you guys see me doing that part. I'll let you see it next time. You'll see that I only added a little bit of the flour in right now. It's really important that you do not overflour it. The recipe calls for 4½ cups of flour, but if you find that your mixture is a little drier or it's harder to work with, cut the flour down. This is the time for you to feel your way through this and see how you like to do it. Let's incorporate a little bit more flour here, and we're going to work it into a dough. Now, you'll see me using the whisk for this. Usually I'll switch off tools and you'll see me switch to a red spatula. The whisk is really not the best tool for this because you want to be able to scrape down the bowl, make sure you're getting all of that flour worked in and incorporated into your dough, because the more you work with it and the more that you incorporate the flour now, the less you'll have to use in the long run, which will result in a much easier dough to work with. Now that I've switched tools, you'll see that I'm scraping down the sides of the bowl, incorporating the flour into this dough ball, which is exactly what it is. We are halfway there. Now, if you have a stand mixer, that's going to make this process a little bit easier for you, but I wanted to show you guys how to make this without using the stand mixer, so I'm just going to use some elbow grease and I'm really going to work it out. Now what you see me checking for as I go around the bowl is the stickiness of the dough ball. You really want it to be able to pull away from the sides of the bowl smoothly. You don't want it to be still sticky. So if it's still sticky, keep working with it. But if you can press it to the side of the bowl and you can pull it off clean, you're ready to dump it out onto a clean surface. Now that our dough ball is nice and smooth, we're going to go ahead and oil our bowl with that oil that I showed you earlier. I like to use a brush. This one is called the Doris. I picked it up from my local bakery store. I'm certain you can find it on Amazon, as you can find everything on Amazon. So go ahead and coat the bowl really well with the oil. Make sure you don't miss a spot. You're coating with the oil because your dough is going to expand and get larger while it's in this bowl proofing for an hour. So you don't want it to stick to your bowl. It'll make it way too hard to get out, way too messy. Trust me, save yourself the headache. Grease your bowl really well. Cover your dough with plastic wrap or foil and set it somewhere warm for 1 hour. Now that our dough has risen for about an hour and a half, it's doubled in size, so I'm going to flour up a surface, spread it out nice and good, and just really prepare it for the dough that I'm going to fold out. You don't need a lot, you just need enough so that it's not sticking to your work surface while you try to flatten out the air. So here's our dough. And we're just going to gently pull that out, put it on the counter. You can see how many air bubbles we have there in the dough. Those can be wonderful for some things, but for this, we don't want them. So what we're going to do is flatten out the dough to get rid of all those air bubbles. So let's just press it and smooth it out. Now, if you've ever rolled cinnamon buns before, you kind of know this move. You want to roll this dough up really tight. That way it'll form a loaf for us. Just keep rolling forward, making sure you keep the dough nice and tight to form a loaf. Now you'll notice that we'll have a seam on the top at the end of our rolling. What you want to do is pinch across that seam to seal your loaf. Now that we have a nice loaf, I'm going to grab my Temptations Bakeware loaf pan and prep it. I'm going to brush it with a little bit of the same avocado oil that I used to brush down the bowl, just to make sure our bread gets nice and crispy all the way around. I like a nice crust on my bread. I'm not really certain about you, but if you don't like a nice crust or a thick crust on your bread, just skip this part. Now I'm going to take each end and dust off the extra flour first, but we're going to fold under each end, just roll them under. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. Remember, this is your kitchen, you're baking your way. Tuck it into the nice little pan and cover that up and leave it somewhere warm for it to have a second rise for 1 hour. While your dough is proofing, preheat the oven to 400 degrees and let it warm up nice and hot. After about another hour, here's what our loaf looks like. You see it's kind of swollen up in the pan, it's filled it in nice and tight. So what I'm going to do to darken my bread and to help it bake a little bit is I'm going to brush it with a little bit of warm milk. I like to do this just to give it some color in the oven. If you don't want to do this, you can absolutely skip this step, but like I said, this is my way of doing things, so I bake my way. I encourage you to do it yours. If you want to skip over this, please feel free to do so, or if you want a little darker bread, try some egg in with your milk. That'll help it brown really nicely. For now, I'm just using the milk. When your bread sounds like this, it's ready. Let's cut into it so we can see what it looks like. All of our hard work is paying off. It has a nice crust on the outside. It's nice and soft on the inside. Look at that. Think about the sandwiches. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Comment down below your favorite bread recipes. Thanks.